Mini episode 689 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by the Pullins Group, delivering public affairs consulting and marketing services for small businesses trying to grow. Follow them on the web at pullinsgroup.com.
The FDH Lounge. You want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the History of the Royal Rumble anthology in the FDH Lounge. Rick Morris and Kyle Ross, your tour guides through history. We are up to 5E 2007. We're looking at that year's Royal Rumble. Again, as we do at the outset of all of these ones, I want to refer everybody back if you want general thoughts on the Royal Rumble, how it came to be, its place in the company, the setup of it, anything, backstory structure, go to 1A 1988. We'll refer you to that. We have it in the first 10 or 15 minutes there. We don't touch upon any of that stuff. Once we move forward past that, it's all macro level stuff, of which I don't think we have a ton for 2007, and then of course micro level for the event itself. We touch upon the undercard, and we touch upon, of course, the match itself, and we star right the hell out of that sumbitch. So I'm looking forward to this one, Kyle.
I hope that whatever we did in those first 10 to 15 minutes of Part 1A was good, for as much as we reference it, because for the life of me, I can't remember what I said at this point. So
we'll have to play that back at some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope it was good, for as much as we reference
it. Better have been.
Yeah,
yeah.
I know, really. Jeez. What did I say?
Well, we were explaining the structure of it. I think we talked
The Royal
about
Rumble is a professional wrestling pay-per-view with 30 people with scripted storylines.
I think we talked about the dry run that they did of it, to Pat Patterson playing a role and going through it. Royal Rumbles throughout, or Battle Royals, I should say, throughout history. But yeah, we're up to 07. I said 5E. That is the last one of this Chapter 5 that we're in, essentially. It is the end of the era of Split Happens, and since you are responsible, Kyle, for delineating the eras here, talk about why 2007 is the end of that era. Let's start on that.
Well, it's tough, isn't it? Because it seemed like there was a lot cleaner dividing lines in the earlier eras, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first part we call the beginning to the best.
Yeah.
That was just a funny way, 88 to 92. That's kind of the old school era, right?
Right.
It's, Hogan is in all of those. Is obviously the biggest star, and it's a lot of guys who were popular in the 80s.
Right.
It was still kind of the carryover from that era. Then we did the down years, 93 to 95, which is generally considered, the worst 3 years in company history.
Right.
96 to 99 was Monday Night Wars.
Yep.
Pretty simple why then. There was a very serious competition for best wrestling company in the country at that time with WCW.
That's right.
Then, what did we call 2000 to 2002? I can't remember anymore. That was like that.
Well, you're putting me on the spot here, but it was.
What did I even call that? It was like the post. It was like. Oh, it was called From the War to the Game.
The War to the Game.
That was my best name too. I thought I can't even remember it. Yeah, it was the War to the Game.
I knew it had game in there somewhere. Okay.
And that obviously talked about the post.
Right.
Monday Night Wars, Triple H, such, and those were the peak years, arguably, for the pay-per-view, the Royal Rumble pay-per-view itself. Then we moved. They did the brand extension, so it was very easy to start that at 03. And the brand extension does continue past 2007, past this pay-per-view. And we'll talk more about this actually at the end of the show, I think.
But it gets
a lot softer.
It gets softer than Vince McMahon at full staff after 2007.
Yeah, so we'll go into why I decided to stop in 2007. Part of it is I just didn't want to have one gigantic part where we're doing like Part G.
Right.
So I decided to stop here.
Additionally, I noticed this as well, that PG starts in 2008, so that does sort of feel like a little bit of a distinction. And it kind of started really with the Benoit tragedy in the summer of 07. So I agree that I think this delineation point, although you're the one that came up with it, I would strongly agree, and I couldn't find a better year to end that era on.
Okay, so you mentioned Benoit, and you're right. That's obviously a huge line of demarcation in company history.
Because
there was a huge shift in company mentality after that happened. That was the summer of 07. I do have in my notes, this is the last Rumble show with Chris Benoit. He's not really a significant part at all. So
among other things, again,
the only time we mentioned
the Benoit thing was the first real seed, at least that I can remember, of PG. Because up until this year, I mean, they were still doing a lot of objectionable stuff. Even after Benoit, they were still doing the whole, they'd gotten away from the who killed Mr. McMahon thing to Mr. McMahon's got an illegitimate kid out there somewhere. But that was almost like the last of the overtly bad taste stuff they were doing. It was getting more family-friendly. So, again, I think you're right on the money here with where you're cutting this.
We also should mention the emergence, for lack of a better term, of a third brand.
Yes.
Here for 2007, that being ECW, which was revived in the summer of 06 based off 2 strong one-night stand pay-per-views. It was a mistake to do it.
Right.
It's funny now with the benefit of hindsight. What NXT has become is clearly what ECW should have been. I think they were actually hindered by the initials of ECW because it conjured up such memories for so many people, and it was never going to be that. So they never should have done it.
You know what the funny thing is?
At least if they wanted to, first of all, the roster was too thin to divide into 3 brands.
Absolutely.
They had issues with 2 brands.
Right.
Which we've beaten a dead horse in the previous 4 parts. But calling it ECW was a mistake.
Well, and here's the thing, too. If you look at ECW, or for these purposes, what they would call WWECW, in the latter years, 2009, 2010, it really had sort of become a poor man's version of what NXT is today. They were using it for a lot of developmental talent and for rehabbing some guys on the roster to give them a fresh coat of paint. So
yes.
it had taken a little bit of a step in that direction right before it went under for good.
But the talent wasn't near...
Of course not.
What it is now in NXT.
No, not even close.
It was also a TV product.
Right.
So they had to serve that master, and they didn't do a very good job of it.
That's right.
On
over the air.
Sci-Fi.
Well, yeah, cable television.
Yeah. I should reference this, and what's interesting is you will probably correct me, although this is a milestone in my quote-unquote professional career that I'm referencing.
Okay.
I believe this show was the last one I reviewed for Sunday Night Submission.
It was indeed.
Okay, sorry.
It absolutely
sorry,
was.
FDH.
Yeah.
Whoops. Seemed like a good idea at the time to cross-promote. Oops, sorry about that.
We were supposed to be on the air together on Sunday nights, and almost as soon as we started, you guys went kaput. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah, and there were a lot of reasons for that.
I know.
One, we were burned out. 2, 06 was kind of a...
How much bad wrestling can you watch, right?
Shitty year, for lack of a better term. 06. I'll say this, though. I remembered feeling this way back then, and watching the show now with, 9 years of hindsight, I think the feeling was somewhat reiterated. I was surprised what a solid show this was. I remember that we had gone through in the SNS days and just basically just pissed and moaned our way through 06, all these issues. And I remember this show came around, and it was one of the few that Ryan and I looked at each other like, this was a good show. Wow.
Yeah.
Too bad we didn't get a chance to do more of these when we could say, I enjoyed this show.
By the standards of that era, maybe. But, I mean, by just regular baseline pro wrestling standards, I wouldn't say that I enjoyed the show. That would be a big overstatement.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. I like this show. I don't think it is – it's certainly not. Let me correct that right away, qualify this. It is certainly nowhere near the heights of the 2000 or 01 shows. It's nowhere near that. But honestly, there aren't many others that we've talked about as a show, top to bottom. Forget about just the Rumble. Although I think this Rumble's very good. We'll get to that. But I don't think top to bottom as a show, there are too many other Rumble pay-per-views that were infinitely better than this one.
Well, no.
This has 2 very good matches on it.
I've got the Royal Rumble match itself probably middle of the spectrum to slightly above average, slightly. But I mean, the show itself, I don't know, because I've only really rated the matches themselves. The show itself, compared to some of the other fart fests that I've sat through so far, 06 and some of the other ones. I mean, better than some, better than the mid-'90s ones, obviously, but I wouldn't call it better than the late '90s or even early '90s ones.
See, you and I kind of had a disagreement on those late '90s ones. fans.
Yeah.
Particularly 99. We got into a rather heated debate, if I remember. It got very personal.
We did
at
indeed.
some point.
Yes.
Look,
things were said.
The era is clearly not as hot. And if you want to talk about, Raw and the general state, and look, things get quite dark, obviously, for the company by the latter half of 2007. Sure, 2007 as a year does not stack up to those peak Attitude Era years.
I do.
And 06 did this show no favors with a weak building. But I think as a show, this was a pretty effective show. You had, compared to 06, the brand split was... It had a lot of the same issues that we complain about, where they weren't developing guys on the different brands enough. But at least on this show, you had 3 well-defined champions. And you had a feeling they were the 3 guys the company, for better or worse, wanted to build around.
Right.
And I had no problem with that. Now, 2 of the 3 title matches on the show aren't very good. But you at least had the feeling with this show, compared to the 06 one, they had direction. And when I watch these Rumble shows, that's largely what I'm evaluating. Are they executing a direction well? That's the most important thing. And I think they did have one. Now, we should point out there was a major injury before this show that affected the booking of it. Triple H.
That's right.
Will not be here. He tore his quad for a second time, I believe, although I don't know because I didn't sit in all those meetings. But everything that I had read and all implications said that he was going to win this Rumble originally. So they did have to change that. And
that he was going to get the rematch with Cena at WrestleMania.
I do know that
HBK
was on the books.
was a placeholder.
Yeah, HBK, his buddy in DX, was just a placeholder. They even said that on the HBK DVD, the real long one, that he essentially took Triple H's spot at WrestleMania. So I'll believe that. And with the 3 well-defined champions, you had to then create some sort of top contender. Actually, you had to create multiple top contenders for the various championship matches at WrestleMania. And what I liked about the Rumble, and we'll get to it when we break down the match, is you really didn't know who was going to win this one compared to other ones. We talked about this once they introduced, all the way back in 93, the gimmick of the winner of this challenges for the title match. It somewhat limits the pool of possible winners. I'm not saying the pool was huge here, but I did feel that more than most, there was an unknown factor that worked in this Rumble.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is that you now have, theoretically on paper, 3 major titles.
But no one is going to challenge for the CW title.
Well, true. But it's a thing where, by this point in time, I think we had gotten to where, clearly, Cena with the WWE Championship, that had been established as the preeminent title. The world title was below it. So, where you're right about this, and where in subsequent years, like 2011 with Sheamus, or 2012, we could still be surprised because the stakes aren't as high. You can have somebody, a little bit of a surprise, win and challenge for the belt that doesn't mean as much as the biggest belt. By the same token, it also devalues what it means to win the Royal Rumble. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of another.
Luckily, it was a strong winner here. Again, we'll get to that.
It was.
And I do want to touch on something you just said because it's a problem. And it's something I brought up when we talked about 06. They shouldn't have, but they definitely did, made it a point to have one title stronger than the other. That's not the point of having a split brand. You should have 2 equally strong titles, theoretically. And when they did the Cena-Batista flip-flop in the summer of 05, they really were saying, hey, Cena's the guy, not Batista. And they doubled down on that, and this is part of the reason why I cut the split happens part off here. They doubled down on the reinforcing that Cena's title was more important, when despite who wins this Rumble, they still put Cena on last at WrestleMania.
Well, as they did in 2006, because Ray won the world
right.
title the year before, the world title match shot.
Yeah,
and it was
and we
it
always
was Cena.
knew that Raw was the preeminent brand and stuff,
Right.
but I think that, and it was better for SmackDown to have Batista back and as the champion.
But it was a combination of Raw is the flagship show, as they've always said.
Yeah.
But Cena, by this point, It's no
they
longer
were building
a matter
the
of,
promotion around him.
Exactly. It's not Cena and Batista. It's becoming, although they're not making it obvious on air, but if you're watching, you can see it. It's becoming Cena is the guy by early 07.
Which is why I would argue that the brand split should have been ended sooner, because if you want to do that with Cena, okay.
Right.
But it only cheapens him than to have other champions.
It does indeed. The other thing, too, I want to touch on this real briefly before you get to the card, because
I love, by the way, how you take your notes on the back of an envelope.
It's just sort of become a tradition of mine. Yeah, I could. That
So
leaves
how
me.
small do you write?
I write fairly small and fairly messy, but I can read my handwriting here. I have filled up the one side of this envelope and a little bit. I should have stopped to consider that on the dark side of the envelope I can't read my writing as well. But
by the way,
such is life.
Strict follower of the Constitution that you are.
Yes, I am.
Is that written with a a feather pen there or whatever, or what? Or
Liberty, bro.
Do you dip in ink? Do you re-dip in ink as you're taking the notes?
Liberty, bro. I should. But here, it's
Good
so funny
Lord.
you mentioned that, because I'm about to get to a point, quite frankly, about Donald Trump, because you were talking about the state of the product.
Please, not that.
Well, here's why. Because there's been some revisionism in history that, and this, you can find this on places like PWO and DVD-VR, that the product was hotter than people gave it credit for in early 07, maybe about ready to be poised for another break into the mainstream that didn't happen, but that the Trump thing, which in retrospect, it makes me laugh. Everybody says Trump and Vince is what drew the house. If you were watching, but if you're watching the product at the time, it was more so the 2 world title matches, I thought.
No, there's no doubt that Trump and Vince drew that.
Well,
house.
okay.
There's no doubt about that. I don't think there's any denying that.
I never got that sense. I got the sense that it was Batista,
Well,
Undertaker, and that it was Cena, HBK.
No.
But that's
No,
all right.
That show, it did do a monster number on pay-per-view.
It did.
And most people would owe that to Donald Trump and the stipulation of the haircut at WrestleMania.
And I will say this,
I'll
too.
say this. What hurt that WrestleMania's legacy,
right?
because it did do well business-wise, is that a number of the stars, forget about Cena and Batista, but there were other guys they were attempting to build, did not pan out. Namely, 2 guys you see in title matches on this show, Bobby Lashley,
right,
who they had earmarked for a run at the top.
7 months later, he'd be done.
And Mr. Kennedy, who had a disastrous 2007,
well, that's
quite
it.
frankly.
That's exactly it. But see, the thing of it is that I thought was interesting, I made a note of this, there was no mention of Donald Trump on this show. That angle had yet to start. I don't even know if they'd thought of the angle yet. So it was kind of interesting that something that you're saying drew the house, a lot of people say drew the house, it wasn't even a part of this show, which is really kind of interesting to me. I will say, too, that the whole thing, the setup for it, the build of it, I said this before, that I thought you needed to have, if you're using it to try to establish Lashley, you have Trump cut promos about this guy's huge, he's the future of wrestling, as opposed to, this is some guy I'm getting to fight for me. And, you've said before, well, Rick, it worked anyways, but I think they could have drawn more money with it.
Did I say that?
You said that. You said, Rick, you're nitpicking, and you even
Is
said...
that on tape? When did I say this?
I think we were doing the WrestleMania history.
God, you remember a lot of things.
Yeah,
I don't remember anything.
I remembered it. You said I was a nitpicker, and I said they should have had him cutting promos.
Oh, it absolutely could have been done better, but it did work.
You said to me, how's Donald Trump going to go cut a promo? I said, he cuts promos all the time, and you said that's about him and his stuff and whatever. He can't cut wrestling promos, and I disagreed with you.
No, I agree with myself.
After watching him on the presidential campaign,
he can cut a great promo for himself. I also think he's better than that. I think Donald Trump's promo work has improved since 07.
Well, maybe he's better on the stick since
his
then.
message is
maybe he's
nosedive. Jesus Christ. By the way, can we not talk about Donald Trump? I was in a good mood when we started this. I don't want to talk about Donald Trump.
But he's part of the history of this year. I just also want to say, too.
Not this show, though. Like you said, you wouldn't have known anything about Donald Trump.
But I find it. But this is always about the setup to WrestleMania.
Yes,
and to me, it's noteworthy that he's not a part of it. But that's
okay. You could compare that with, say, Mike Tyson, who was a more successful celebrity.
But it was tomorrow night on Raw. He'll be here.
Well, no, he was at the Rumble because that's when he cut his infamous Cold Stone promo. Speaking of guys who can't cut wrestling promos. Anyway,
by the way, every time I go by a Cold Stone Creamery, I'm obliged to go Cold Stone, Cold Stone.
Yeah, I do that too. That's sad people. You want to break down the show?
Let's do it.
Okay. We opened with the Hardys versus Eminem.
Okay.
What I thought was a solid tag team match.
Cosplaying the rock and rolls in the midnights of the 80s.
Not as good as that. Yeah, but I got that feeling. It was a longer match than I think which is certainly welcome. They gave him time.
Yeah.
It's not quite as, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not as fast-paced, and there's not as many high spots as maybe you think.
Right.
I mean, these guys were involved in a ladder match, I think, in December. That played into this a little bit. Mercury had a face mask on.
Right.
I think he had his nose legitimately busted in that, if I remember.
That's right.
And they did an angle where Eminem injured Hardy's jaw. They gave him the snapshot, which was a really cool move on the cement. That was an angle, by the way. They showed this before the match. Mm-hmm. That was an angle that in the old, I mean, not to be like get off my lawn guy. In the old days, that would have kept you out for weeks, and they would have played it up.
That's right.
Here it was just something like, the guy was back a week later.
Well, yeah.
And we'll play it up. But whatever. What I found interesting about this, and I was kind of confused because a lot of this era I struggle to remember. It's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that happened in like 1990 I can recall like that. Oh, yeah, this happened then. That was it. Because everything, it was sort of a less is more approach.
Right.
Here they did a lot of things and it's easier to forget stuff. But the partners in this match were on different brands. And it took me a minute to pick. I had actually to look that up on Wikipedia to figure out what was going on. So Jeff was the IC champion and on Raw, and he had won the title from Nitro, John Morrison, and they had been feuding. But Mercury and Matt Hardy were SmackDown guys.
Yeah.
And this just was kind of an interpromotional match where they reunited both teams who had been working together on, they had worked the horrible December to Dismember pay-per-view.
Right.
And they worked in that, I think it was a four-way at whatever the SmackDown pay-per-view was in December. What is that, Armageddon or something?
I think so, yeah.
So it was kind of interesting, I guess, because this is a tri-brand pay-per-view now. I guess it was okay to have them on there, but it was unique. I had to look this up. I was like, what's going on here? Yeah,
because they were referencing it in the commentary. I have a different take on what you just said there, and that is that the brand split, when it did finally go away, and again, the brand split, that's maybe the major reason you're ending this era here, because this was the year that it got a lot softer after this. In the end, they stopped having it because it stopped making any sense, and it was for a long time the death of 1,000 cuts. It was no one big thing, but it was a million small things, and it was things like this. We need to get these four guys in a match on pay-per-view. Let's just contrive to get them out there, and we'll worry about it later. And it's things like this that eroded the integrity of the brand split.
The fact that it was a Raw and SmackDown guy teaming up against a Raw and they didn't, while they pushed it in the commentary, it didn't seem like a huge deal.
Well, yeah. I mean, but versus a couple of years ago, you brought this to my attention. The year that in the Rumble, the four guys faced each other.
Oh, that got over huge in 05. Yeah,
in 05.
Huge.
2 years later, look at this.
Yeah,
it's just a fart in a thunderstorm that you got four guys here, different brands and whatever.
I should mention Jim Ross, after a 1-year sabbatical, is back with the company and on commentary here.
That's right. He was back. I have a note that at ringside at different points here, Molina was screaming in a key that had previously only been heard by Batista.
Oh, no. I wondered who was going to reference that. I felt terrible for Morrison when I watched this. I was like,
and I like him a lot.
This was after that, too.
Johnny Mundo these days, doing fine work.
Decent-looking guy, too. He should have.
Absolutely.
Can't believe he didn't sock Batista. He lost a lot of respect in the locker room, they say, for that.
How wild must she be to have him put up with all that? You know what I mean? Jesus. But he's not even the hottest diva.
I don't know. Well, JR did have a line in here. Well, I don't make a lot of women yell, so I don't know. That which was amusing. As was he. It's funny because now the announcers are told, never mention the refs by name.
Right.
He's just the referee. He certainly name-dropped Jack Doan quite a few times in this match,
That's kind of, that was
Unfortunately,
jarring.
though, this was sort of like that period where JR would get names mixed up all the time, and he kept screwing up Nitro and Mercury, and I kept yelling, no, that's Nitro, damn it, not Mercury. But anyway, this match was pretty good.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think it was as good as the Rockers Orient Express match in 1991, just for a frame of reference. I thought it was close.
Yeah, 6 of one, half dozen of another, I guess.
There was a good spot where Nitro avoided the poetry in motion with a sort of sloppy LeBay straw cradle, but I thought it was kind of unique. Hardys go over with the blind tag swanton bit that they did a lot in tag matches. And this was fine. This was really good. They gave it plenty of time, which is fine. Both these teams were very good. Eminem took most of the match. There were heat segments on both Jeff and Matt.
Right.
There was a false tag. But, no, it was good. Right team won. You could tell kind of early that the Hardys were going to win because Eminem was dominating so much. They did play up the Matt Jaw injury. They were working on him a lot. I have no complaints with this. It was a very solid opener in the lone non-world title match of the undercard.
Yeah, it was what it was. Before the next match, they had some kind of a goofy backstage thing here. Edge, Orton, Booker.
I'll show you mine if you show me yours. I feel that we'd seen that joke before on one of these backstage kits where the one where they, what they have is they're drawing numbers for the Rumble.
Right.
One, they both pull their numbers out and they're holding them. Well, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. And then King Booker shows up and says, "Tell me you just didn't say that." Kelly was there.
Today that would be Ron Simmons with a damn.
He did that later in the show.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Because Kelly, who was the token diva they had running the draw, picked up the two balls. She's like, "These are the biggest balls I've ever seen." And Ron Simmons showed with damn. It just seemed very contrived and lame. That first match, I'd give that like 3.25 stars. I think, just if we're keeping track of that.
I'd go a quarter to a half under that probably.
Oh wow, you're a tough guy.
Yeah.
So we have 3 title matches to talk about now. First time ever, 3 world title matches, I should say.
Yeah. Bobby
Lashley, not Lindsey Trump, versus Test is your ECW title match. Right off the bat, problem number 1 with ECW. You've used this before, and I liked it a lot.
Okay.
The idea of a nuke push or a microwave push, right? You call
it?
When all of a sudden this guy who's been doing nothing for a long time is now supposed to be perceived as a big threat.
Test was about 4 or 5 months into this, though, in all fairness.
Okay. But he was also, in all fairness, 6 years removed from his peak.
Yeah.
7.
He'd been badly misused.
He'd been,
pigeonholed as a mid-carder.
Yes.
Well, and a very good working big man. I don't feel like that gets said enough.
That's fine. Mark Henry, the year before, his work had dramatically improved over time. But you can't erase the fact that for 6, 7, 8 years, you watch this guy and you become less and less invested in him. And what really hurt ECW as a brand here is this was a guy, Test, who had been mid-card for life on both Raw and SmackDown. All of a sudden he moves to this third brand, and it just comes across as third rate. It's like, oh, God, you're telling me like this guy who was a nothing on Raw and SmackDown is a big play, is the quote-unquote impact player in ECW? It just made ECW look bad.
Not only that, I mean, from my perspective, here, being a work rate guy, Test not good enough to carry Bobby Lashley to a good match.
No,
this
Lashley,
is one of these bad combos.
You could tell he was still pretty green.
Yeah, it's like, who's going to carry who here? Test is the better worker, but not good enough.
He was even greener than Cena.
Yeah.
Certainly greener than Cena.
A lot greener than Cena,
when Cena won the title and he moved to Raw.
Right.
Remember, they tried to mask his weaknesses, and it kind of backfired because he would get booed a lot.
Right.
By putting him in there with good workers like Angle or Jericho.
Yeah. Or Edge.
Yeah. They didn't do that here with Lashley, and this match, first of all, has an atrocious ending with a countout.
Right.
They built to a TV match, which that's like a WCW TNA like move.
Blow off on TV. I don't understand it.
So this didn't work. By the way, there was certainly a lot of acting on Mr. Test here.
Yeah.
Who seemed bigger than he'd been in previous years.
Well, yeah.
Just saying.
Look, I mean, it's not even that controversial to say, although neither one of us feels good about talking about it. But what you're talking about, part of the reason he's not here today.
Yes.
A lot of these guys just had issues.
It is. I'm just saying, and it sucks that's like.
We're just acknowledging
that
people.
Plays a role.
We're not making fun of them. We're acknowledging
that plays the role in the microwave push.
Yeah.
Oh, all of a sudden he's super big now. This, by the way, this only got 7 minutes. A count out finish. So what happened is Lashley. By the way, Lashley, I should mention this, he did Lesnar's box jump in his ring entrance. Did you notice that?
That's right. He did.
Are you surprised he never came back? He's never come back. Because what's funny is with his athletic background, I think Lesnar versus Lashley now, with what I'll say is kind of a smarter audience, or maybe I should say an audience that is more willing to grasp outside athletic achievements, certainly the emergence of UFC during the time period between, well, UFC was already a big deal here in 2007, but how UFC's kind of changed the perception of how we view these kind of athletes. Don't you think like Lesnar versus Lashley would do huge business?
No, because
really,
Lashley's lost. You're putting me in a situation here for some alliteration. Lashley's lost a lot of luster in TNA, as everybody does.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's true. But God, I don't know. He was just I'll tell you what. As much as everyone, and 95% of the time, they're right for doing it. Bitches about Vince's big man fetish.
Yeah.
My God, Lashley was an impressive physical specimen.
He was.
He was that 5% or whatever it was, where you're like, okay, I buy this guy as a main thing. He just looked the part. And I was willing, as green as he was, to accept him in this role.
I just wasn't, because he was such a crappy worker at that point. I don't like seeing guys get pushed way above their ability level. I want to touch on something you mentioned off air, because I think it raises a good point about the overall state of the product. And you said you could have more easily accepted a microwave push for somebody against Lashley that was a newcomer, that didn't have the stink of years of mid-card on him. And I said to you that this is one of my recurring themes as we're talking about the 2000s here, the lost generation, the biggest drought in company history as far as developing new talent and getting them to stick. Because after the class of 2002, which was extraordinary, from there until when they signed...
That's Cena, Orton, Batista.
And Lesnar.
Yes.
After those, and to whatever extent Shelton Benjamin, although he didn't pan out on that level. From there until 2000... CM Punk likes to take credit in 2006, but for what it was really much more so... Daniel Bryan in 2009, where they started going the route of bringing in the indie guys. This was an entire era of, because remember we talked about it in past Rumbles, Luther Reigns and Heidenreich and all these guys. You had to be big. You had to have tribal tats. You had to this. You had to that, whatever. And that, again, it was just a horrible kind of a deal in terms of the company having guys who could get over and who could become guys who would be credible in this spot. Test was still way more credible than anybody that they had, and that's the sad part about this. And that,
and it brings. They didn't think the CCW thing through, in my opinion. They just didn't have the legs. And now, to be fair, RVD, it was supposed to be a vehicle to get him over, but RVD kind of screwed their plans up.
That's right.
As I unprofessionally try to untangle my cord here. But give me a second here. As I said, I just wanted to bring this up.
We're working through this in admirable fashion, but yeah, make your point.
End of this match is horrible and does this thing no favors, where Lashley's beating on him, Test gets out of the ring, and just takes a count out, like Money Inc. Natural Disasters WrestleMania 8 style. And
except they kept the titles, and he didn't get to win the title.
What made it worse for me, and that's a good point, what made it worse for me, though, is Lashley immediately gets him back in the ring and kicks his ass and gets his heat back.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily want to see a rematch.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, he just kicked his ass. Why would I want to see this anymore? It just was a bad finish. It wasn't any. It was not, as they say, a good kind of heat.
Let's compare and contrast this to 3 years ago. We talked about it, the one-match feud between Eddie and Chavo at the Royal Rumble. That was a thing where Eddie did a post-match beatdown on Chavo, thus emphasizing, yes, this is the end of the feud, nothing more to see here. Very similar to what you're talking about, but they thought in their heads, well, Lashley didn't get the pinfall, so people won't think it's a blow-off. But like you said, the beatdown on Test afterwards established this feud is over. This feud must not continue.
And unlike Eddie Chavo, wasn't a lot of interest going in.
Oh no! Let's not even compare it in terms of work rate. So this match was not good.
No, it wasn't. I wouldn't even give it a star.
No, I would agree.
There was a Vince Cena segment where Cena was selling his rib injury from Raw at the hands of Umaga. Vince says, "I can't see you being champion much longer. Let's move on."
Right.
Batista versus Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy is your SmackDown title match. I might be the last guy on this ship. I thought Kennedy had a lot of potential. He did himself no favors.
You said so on the SNS show back in the day.
Okay.
You did say that.
He did himself no favors.
I know you sometimes have to be reminded of what you said.
Yes, I do. But I was pretty clear. I thought his in-ring work was not great by any means. I thought he was a good promo, which helped.
That's true.
He was the gimmick of Kennedy, and doing his own ring introductions was strong. Now, what was not strong was the build for him here as the number 1 contender. Do you know what gimmick I hate? I had to look this up to see how he got this title match, truth be told. I hate the Beat the Clock challenge.
Those are bad.
Because
it's always the last guy.
Well, no. They did it differently here.
Okay.
But the thing is, they're always short matches. The matches are always like shorter than they would be.
Right.
So, and it always buries the guy who isn't going to win.
Well, and that's the thing, too, because, it's a clear delineation between the haves and the have-nots.
Now it is more. Here it was, okay, so what they did is they had Kennedy beat Benoit in like 5 minutes and change.
Right.
Undertaker was going to beat Miz, and the perception was, oh, my God, this will take no time at all. Well, Kennedy came in, and I guess it was like a good heel move if you're trying to build him as a heel. He came in, and he kind of kept doing things to delay the pin to the point that Undertaker didn't beat him at the same time. I guess that's okay.
Right.
But the problem was, and they kept hyping Kennedy as having beaten six former world champions.
I wanted to talk about that.
But they were always weak wins.
Right.
It was like, I think he had beaten The Undertaker in some cheap way in a First Blood match.
Right.
They were always just kind of cheap pins. You get the feeling that he wasn't, again, it's so funny when you look at how they booked Triple H, and look, I'm not meaning to turn this into a Triple H bitch fest, but there's no doubt, and there can be no denying, that when it comes to booking a strong heel, the way he was booked compared to like every other heel in the history of this company is so different.
Right.
Like, he actually got clean wins and was made to look really strong. Everyone else just never gets that treatment, and I think it hurts, although I'll say this. By the end of this match, people are chanting for Kennedy against Batista, which I think was a testament to the fact that there was something to this guy. Now, he made an idiot out of himself by claiming he didn't do steroids, and he gets caught like 2 minutes later.
Right.
And then he got hurt. And then what really hurt him was the injury that wasn't. When they freaked out, he had won Money in the Bank later in the year. They thought he was going to be out for months. They had him job his Money in the Bank contract out, and then he was ready to come back a month later. And
the last straw was becoming a political enemy of Randy Orton's, having Orton blame him for an injury.
By then, I think his goose was almost kind of cooked.
I
really think when he went on TV and was like, I never do steroids. Anyone who thinks wrestlers do steroids is an idiot, and then he gets busted.
But I want to mention something else.
The Signature Pharmacy thing.
Signature Pharmacy, late summer, early fall 07. I want to mention something else here in regards to Randy Orton to back up what you just said about Triple H, because you're right. The Triple H push in 99 was the gold standard for getting over a heel, 99-2000. But, somewhere on the next tier, way further back, but on the next tier, 2005, Randy Orton, Legend Killer. Although I guess it was also 03, 04. Now that I think about it, 05 was a reprise when they put him with The Undertaker. I guess the original one was 03, 04 because
he was better booked in 03, 04.
You're right. I'm thinking of the second half of the Legend Killer run. But anyways, this whole thing of beat 6 former world champions, this should be something where you use that to establish somebody who is going to be a permanent main event / upper mid-card player, as opposed to for a one-off, the guy gets beat at the Royal Rumble and back to the mid-card.
Well,
you're wasting.
Here's the thing: they did have in their defense. They did have big plans for him. He was supposed to be the illegitimate son of Vince McMahon.
Okay.
They had big plans. I think he was supposed to work against Triple H at WrestleMania 24.
Okay.
Because it was going to be revealed that Triple H was in the family. They had very big plans, and this is part of the issue you see with the brand extension.
That's right.
You need to have contenders for these title matches. You now have 3 of them, and they had to have somebody challenge Batista here that was kind of over but wasn't going to win. They did protect Kennedy in the booking here. There was a spot where he had Batista beat, but the ref was out.
Right.
So, they didn't bury Kennedy by any means, and they quickly rehabbed him by having him win Money in the Bank, and he announced he was going to challenge at WrestleMania 24 for the title, which I thought would have been a great storyline, but alas, it never worked out. The match itself was kind of sloppy. Again, I said Kennedy was a good promo. His work left a lot to be desired, and Batista, quite frankly, his strength was never between the ropes.
Well, he's also, and I watch him, as I'm rewatching his matches, I find out that maybe I was a little bit hard on him in this respect, but I've always felt
he was capable of having good matches,
to me, he's not a particularly graceful moving big man.
No,
would you
he
agree
is not.
with me? Okay, yeah. I mean, like, which the one thing that I always bring up whenever you harsh on Glenn Jacobs is that, like, I always say, like, that guy is butter for a guy of his size. He moves. He flows in the ring.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just disputing the fact that he's been around for so long.
Right. But, like, Batista, like, every time he takes a bump
he didn't
or whatever,
have an athletic background.
Batista, right. His coordination kind of takes me out of it a little bit.
Yeah, and there just seemed like to be a lot of sloppy transitions in this match. There's a lot of working the knee. We should put out John Bradshaw Layfield now a commentator here.
That's right.
He was amusing during this time period.
Well, and he was, you talk about that with protecting Batista in the booking. Kennedy. I seem to remember that he was harping on that a lot.
He was.
He was totally jocking Kennedy.
You could totally tell that they had Kennedy earmarked for something after this, which is fine. And again, it's kind of what I think kind of hurts the WrestleMania 23 legacy in that two of the guys that they were looking to promote long term and move up the ladder,
absolutely,
he and Lashley, wound up not doing anything. As for Batista, I don't think this did anything for him. It
didn't. But you compare and contrast these first two matches with the third of the big title matches, the WWE title match, the last man standing with Umaga and with Cena, and that was an excellent match.
Yes.
I felt, I don't know what you thought. Like, in terms of psychology,
I thought it was outstanding.
I thought it went on too long.
They
had like death spots in like the middle of the match. Like, how do you keep going after all of this?
Yeah, I've seen other last man standing matches where they teased falls a lot more than they did here. They had there was just not a lot of waste in this, I didn't think. They didn't wait. Like, every spot seemed to mean something. I don't think it went long at all.
It did, but I thought it was over Bookamania just in terms of, like, there are so many. You don't want to have the suspension of disbelief of, like, okay, he should be dead after that. And I felt like there were 3 or 4 of those things before the final pinfall. It felt excessive to me. It didn't feel like a build to the final pinfall, as opposed to this one randomly gets the 3 count, as opposed to when he picked out.
Well, there was no 3 count. He choked him out.
Or choked him out, yeah. I mean, but as opposed to before when he ran him over with a bulldozer and he still got up at the count of 10, I
didn't see. I mean, there was the spot where he was going for the FU, Cena, I guess, and he fell face first on the stairs, and he got busted open. That worked. There was blood here.
First instance I remember of the thrown steps out of the ring by Cena. He did
that
with
that
Umaga.
spot. That was very good.
Yeah.
He was selling the abs the whole time from the angle on Raw where Cena had splashed him through the table.
And at least Cena bleeds. We talk about this as the tail end of the era before PG. Thank God that this was still an era you could bleed.
Well, they were doing things here where blood was kind of a necessity.
Yes.
The issue is you don't need blood to necessarily get over, because I've seen plenty of stuff
but
in
it
wrestling
helps.
get over. Well, here's the thing. You can't, what they do sometimes now is they do things that you're conditioned to think, okay, the guy should bleed, and then he doesn't.
Right.
And that's where I think it hurts. But, okay, so you had that thing with Cena, and it led to him bleeding, which was fine. You did have the thing where he smashed the TV monitor against Umaga's head in the post. And Umaga got up, but it was selling what a monster Umaga was.
We've come a long way since Johnny Valentine, less is more, let me tell you.
Well, unfortunately, you people who expect so many things, and the bar, it's funny, how many times do you watch a ladder match now or a table match or one of these gimmick matches? You're like, oh, geez, these were more violent back in the day.
Like,
and people bitch about that.
Any number of you talked about this before, the one spot during the match here with the Hardys and M&M. How many separate spots were there in this match that if they occurred just randomly on, let's say, a Jim Crockett Promotions show in '87, the guy would have been out 6 months? You know what I mean? The psychology here.
I thought
and that's the wrestling I came up on.
Yeah, but I thought the psychology here was actually quite good. I thought it was just what you've come to expect. Because here's the difference. In '06, the cat's out of the bag, so to speak, and the audience has an expectation for what a last man standing match is.
Right.
And I think this, for me, I'll be very blunt with you. This is a turning point match for me with John Cena in evaluating his career. This was his first great match.
A lot of people have said that.
I give this 4.25 stars. There aren't a lot of matches that we've watched so far that have been better than this. The only ones that I've seen better are the obvious ones. Triple H Foley, Angle Benoit, and Jericho, Benoit.
I'm more around 3 3/4, but I mean that's still.
Well, you hate Cena, so that's not surprising.
No, not even that. I will tell you this though. Your point is one that I've seen in a lot of different corners of the web where people have said that they started to kind of come around on Cena a little bit here.
I was shocked watching this live. I remember again watching and looking at Ryan saying, "This is pretty good."
Having said that, here's what's very interesting. Mr. Cause meet Mr. Effect. I have in my notes here, this is a John Cena match, and this is rare in that era, a big match that the crowd didn't crap on.
No, he didn't. I noticed that.
Yeah.
You know why? I have here, this dynamic worked a lot better for him, where this was sort of a, do you know what this was?
What?
This was a modern update of Hulk Hogan Kamala. I hate to say that because
Umaga
Kamala, but
yeah.
it was a more hardcore, better worked version. Because Hulk Hogan Kamala, truth be told, on the house shows, that wasn't terrible stuff. They did stuff in the cage. It was okay.
By the way,
there was also an unbelievable promo which I've watched one time and I've been on the prowl for ever since, where it appeared Hulk Hogan did all of the cocaine possible and cut this promo where his face was painted like Kamala, and Mean Gene appeared scared for his life.
Yeah, that's
saying. Allegedly.
I vaguely remember that.
It was one of those localized promos.
By the way, in terms of bizarre old school references, JR on commentary throwing out the Bruno Koloff reference. What was that about? At a point in time when Bruno was still public enemy number one of the company.
He probably just felt like doing it. He liked doing those things. That was probably something he went into business for himself, off script. I noticed that too.
So you want to do that colon little thing on me? Huh, Vince?
I'm going to reference your history of your title. What's funny is Vince was probably more mad at the history reference than JR was about the colon.
Probably. So, and to any other company that would in history that would be regarded as a good thing, tying into their history.
I can't believe you would only give this 3 3/4. You are.
Like I said, I just think again it took me out of it because they no-sold, and I don't mean no-sold in terms of shook it off. But here's the thing. I mean no-sold in terms of a couple of these spots should have ended the match, no questions asked.
If you watch other last man standing matches, I think you will have seen...
The monitor of the head is the one in particular I was thinking of.
You'll have seen stuff that...
Maybe I need to rewatch more.
Yeah, I think you need to watch more last man standing matches. Because you like Triple H Jericho, there was a ton of stuff there. There was like brutal, like unprotected chair shots and stuff that weren't ending the match and whatnot. So, yeah, I think... These guys, by 2006, there was an expectation for a last man standing match.
Okay.
And these two had to meet that. Whether and when, what am I trying to say here? Old school psychology be damned, then be damned.
Okay. Well, that was pretty much the death of old school psychology in this match.
I think old school psychology had died before 2006.
Yeah,
personally.
you're probably...
I do not think this match keeps Jim Cornette up at night.
You're probably right. He's too busy bitching about Lucha Underground, but... on to the main event match itself.
There was a Ric Flair number draw, which was moderately amusing, where all the women came out and started grinding on him. Yeah,
it's funny that we just used the word unprotected in another context a couple of seconds ago here, but there we go. Lillian ran through the rules again here this year. This
did a lot better job than the previous year.
Yes, yeah. Well, she wasn't interrupted by the Spirit Squad either, so there's that. But they kept, I mentioned this to you off here, they kept harping on this, the most star-studded Royal Rumble in history. Really, brah? Really?
This was not the most star-studded Rumble in history, but what are they going to say?
I mean...
That it's not?
In the first 20 years of it, this would have been the 20th one. I'd say parked comfortably in the middle, off the top of my head. Maybe, just maybe, 3 stray...
I think...
Short and curlies above the middle.
Look, they didn't have the Austins or the Rocks, obviously.
Right.
Who largely were the only stars when they won them in 90. I mean, the thing is, one thing I'll say about this one compared to some of the previous years we've done, there weren't a lot of the duds in there. Did you notice that? Like most guys, I'm like, oh, this guy's. There were a few in here. I mean, Kevin Thorne worked. There was The Miz, who was a nothing. But there weren't a ton of guys who were those one-year wonders.
Here's the funny thing, though. I know this is not the way they meant it in, because this is a company that has always done all it can to crap on the real ECW. But the fact that you had RVD in there, Sabu, whatever.
Dreamer, Sandman.
I'm kind of marking out in that way. Like,
of course you are.
Yeah, I was liking that. But I still, even in my biased ECW heart of hearts, to me that doesn't make it the most star-studded
No,
Rumble ever.
it was not the most star-studded Rumble ever.
It was not on the level with 02, 92, or probably several other ones after that. Because...
Yeah, I mean, because you didn't have... It was funny because there's some of those Rumbles where they hype, oh, you've got, multiple previous Rumble winners.
Yeah.
This one had, you had Benoit was a previous Rumble winner.
Right.
Michaels had won it in the 90s, his previous run with the company. And that was probably it. Oh. It was interesting watching this because, and you agreed, we've talked about this a little bit off air, this is a really good Rumble, I think. I think it's one of the better Rumbles, actually, ever. Because it's somewhat unique. And I think it'll take you a while. Anyone who's watched it knows what makes this Rumble. It's the ending.
Right.
But when you're watching through it, you're probably, if you've never seen this before and you just start watching it and you're halfway through, you're probably sitting there and thinking to yourself, why does everyone think this Rumble's so great? Because I will say this, in the con department, I know you don't like when I start checking off those boxes on the spreadsheet, although we're reviewing a show. I don't know why I wouldn't do that. But this one didn't really have any, angles, or I don't think necessarily anyone got elevated.
Right.
They tried to, with, CM Punk, this half-hearted elevation. Oh, CM Punk's still in there, but he really wasn't doing anything.
Right.
He didn't eliminate anyone.
Right.
There tended to be a lot of guys in the ring at one time in this for most of it. Never too many. I think there was a point when they kind of loaded up towards the end to get the fodder ready for Great Khali, who, ironically enough, was one of the better booked guys in this.
Right.
Finley lasting so long was kind of odd to me. Not that I don't like Finley, but he wasn't doing anything
Him
at
and
that
Flair
time.
were 1-2, which was, I have in my notes that that's a random kind of a pairing. Kind of odd.
It was, and you kind of wanted to think it was a big deal. It sort of wasn't, but...
I mean, Finley, at that point, again, he would get over more later in the year, but he still wasn't at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought he had a bigger ceiling than they pushed him to as a badass babyface. He's a guy that the crowd really kind of got into, and if they'd have gone with this sort of...
He was old, though, and in their mind, they don't like old people.
But if they'd gone with sort of this poor man's Austin proto-blue-collar ass-kicker kind of a thing...
You just think that anyone can be the next Steve Austin.
I saw... No, not the next Austin, but I saw some Austin-like things as far as him being an ass-kicker the people were getting behind. But it was interesting.
Those episodes.
Well, they did the whole thing of Kenny Dykstra coming out at number 3.
I didn't mind. You talk about another guy might be the only guy on the ship for. I thought Kenny Dykstra had potential.
Oh.
His goose was cooked when Cena cooked his goose, I think, or whatever.
Yeah, didn't he raise a stink about Cena taking Mickey James away from him or something?
Well, I mean, it was better than, I guess Johnny Nitro saying, oh, yeah, just do my girlfriend, Batista.
Well, he lost his push with Vince when that happened. But,
yes. But I thought he had potential.
Sure he had potential.
Absolutely. Remember, he was a young guy. Everyone hated him, though. Didn't he? He was one of those guys who kind of no one liked backstage. He was
that's the thing, too, of there are guys who you see them on screen and they do such a good job of playing a dick, and it's because apparently they're just channeling what's inside of them. And that's an old school thing to do. That's what old school guys used to do, is just channel what's inside of you. I have in my notes here, too, in terms of early in the match, Matt Hardy at number 4, after his earlier match, you talk about the thinness of this whole thing here. 3 brands, but no depth. But by the same token, the whole thing here, what I will concede, while this wasn't the most star-studded Royal Rumble of all time, they were dead wrong about that. I have in my notes here, especially when I start talking about the ECW, the old school guys here, to me it's a higher floor than some of the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's what I said. You didn't, with a couple exceptions, like I said, Kevin Thorne, The Miz, Viscera as the love machine.
All right, so I guess I just said it a different way, but that's...
There weren't a great number of duds. Everyone who came out, you're like, oh, I kind of like this guy.
Right.
But, none of them... It's much different than, say, 98 or 2000, where there's this huge juxtaposition with, the top star in the match and, everyone else.
Right.
Here, it just sort of seemed like everyone was kind of even, and it did make for, I think, a more interesting Rumble in that you really didn't, in the absence of storylines, you just kind of didn't know who was going to win here. I think this was kind of a... What's the word I'm looking for? In theory, the theory behind the Rumble, this one followed the theory of every man for himself, anyone can win it, that kind of thing. I think this Rumble succeeded on that level. I'll say this. The 3 champions were all baby faces, right?
Right.
The heel side was really weak.
It was.
I mean, you had Edge and Orton basically as rated RKO, who were kind of left to carry the heel side.
That was about it, yeah.
Yeah, because it comes down to two baby faces, Undertaker and Michaels. There just was... You think that this is one of those ones that they would have put a young heel in early and had him go long, kind of like, I mean, Ted DiBiase was obviously established long before he did it in 90, or like Triple H was a guy in 96, even though he really didn't do it took a while for him to take after that. The Rock in 98, remember? He got in early and went long and stayed until the end.
Right.
This is a Rumble. I think it could have used that because they had some young heels here that they wanted to push, but they weren't really put in, like MVP, for instance. He was kind of like the one outlier left at the end, but he came in at the end, and he just happened to still be there.
Further evidence of what you're saying is when you're talking about the picture of the company at that time, you're talking about Undertaker, Michaels, the last two in the match here. Of course, one of the two world title main events I refuse to include Lashley and Umaga, and that since it wasn't even an ECW title match at WrestleMania. But for the world title, it was Undertaker v. Batista at WrestleMania. So on different cards at different times, they were having to play up Megaface versus Megaface.
And it was Cena versus HBK on the Raw side.
Cena you're right.
The two world title matches at WrestleMania were both babyface versus babyface. It was a very parallel build, which we'll touch on in a second.
Absolutely, but that's that WrestleMania. You're right about that, and I missed it.
And Triple H was going to be a face.
He was
going
to be a face
coming into, so that was another face. I mean,
it's a tremendous imbalance.
Yeah, I mean the heel side was
decimated.
It's funny here in 2016 when we're recording it.
Right.
Everyone keeps talking how weak the heel side is.
Right.
On WWE. Wasn't it weaker here?
You'd kill today for a guy who is as viable in that spot as early 07 Orton or early 07 Edge. You'd kill for either one of those guys today. They don't hardly have that. Versus who? Yeah. Sheamus? Get out of here with that crap.
The League of Nations?
The League of Nations?
I know you don't like Woodrow Wilson. I know you want to underrate all the great things he did for this country, but yeah, they were pretty bad.
Thank God we had Calvin Coolidge to save the country after him. But,
how'd the economy do?
It was recovering, but but it was an interesting match. It was a thing here. You had corrected me on something previously. I think this was also during the WrestleMania series because I think when I had
you remember things. What did I correct you?
Well,
I like hearing when I correct you.
You were right because I got this wrong. That Cena, because I said in 08, Cena was the first guy ever to come out at number 30 and it did the surprise thing. You said, no, it was Taker the year before. And I was like, oh, yeah, okay. It was. But here's the thing.
Well, this wasn't a surprise. He was booked to be in the match.
No. And I get that. But the one criticism I have is you can't, and I realize you and I are taking a different view of this than standard booking because we're looking at this year to year over the course of the history of the company. But I think you have a certain responsibility as a booker, knowing that you have to do this year after year after year, to not burn something out for no reason. And I feel like there was no reason for Taker to come out at 30. I think you want to limit the number of times somebody wins at 30.
Though. It had never happened.
This
was the first thing. Like, to me, I thought, I have a completely opposite thing. To me.
But they did it in 2010 with Edge, too, did they not?
No, he wasn't 30.
Oh, he wasn't 30?
No.
Okay, all right.
Well,
here's the thing. They probably couldn't do it because it would have been 3 and 4 years. Edge at 30 in 2010 would have made a lot more sense, but they couldn't do it.
The Cena thing was a huge surprise, and we'll talk about that when we get to 08.
Yeah.
The whole thing is, number 30 had never won, and I think they really did need to do that because
they need to win here. I disagree. I totally disagree. Save it for when it means more.
Sick of. They didn't know what was going to happen the next year. They didn't know. The Cena thing at number 30 worked so well.
I'm not saying they knew Cena was going to be out. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm just suggesting that there are certain things that you should have that you should only use when it really means something.
Well,
I didn't feel like it meant
what they had done too much of before this was
number 1 or number 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like they had done it in 06. Remember, I bitched about it. By that point, that kind of hurt that match in my eyes in 06 because I was like, Jesus, we're doing 1 and 2 going coast to coast again. Like, it speaks to the fact how many times they did do it that they don't do that anymore, really.
Right.
Yes, it is a little... I don't know. It just shows
unnecessary.
I don't know if it was unnecessary. I just think that, okay, yes, you have a point in that after 20 years of number 30 never winning, number 30 all of a sudden won back-to-back years.
That's right.
And I think that's the only time that 30's ever won is those 2 years, so it's fine. in the mosaic. I don't have a problem with that. I have that in my thing. This is the first time number 30 ever won, and I thought that kind of made for a. I don't think it necessarily helped the match in any way, but it was something that needed to be done to get over the importance of number 30.
Right.
Because quite frankly, I think the luck of the draw had begun to get cheapened by the booking of previous Rumbles where they put stars in early and they had them go coast to coast. We should talk that this is the best ending to any Royal Rumble ever.
It is.
Because that's what makes them. Forget about, there's not a ton that happens that's noteworthy the first two-thirds. Things pick up when Khali comes in, starts tosses a lot of the guys who've been in for a while.
Right.
It's like him, Michaels, Edge, Orton, MVP left. Undertaker comes down at number 30. It winds up being Undertaker and Michaels against Edge and Orton. Edge and Orton are dominating the match.
By the way, we had our obligatory Kane dominance spot.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if he was a face or heel in this match.
He must have been a.
I think he was a face because they did reference an Inferno match with MVP.
Well, not only that, I'm looking here on Wikipedia, and with Booker T.
With Booker T,
yeah.
Yes, you're right. But I was unclear when he came out.
Okay.
I think by the end of it, I was like, okay, he must have been a face.
Sure.
But when he came out, same thing with Shelton Benjamin too. Was another guy I couldn't remember what the hell he was doing at the time.
Right. They weren't doing the Mama stuff anymore. Thank God.
No, that was the year previous.
Yeah.
So it comes down to Undertaker and Michaels. And the spot where they're both, Michaels had been knocked out and out of the ring, comes back in to eliminate Edge and Orton, who were about to do a concerto to the Undertaker. And him and Undertaker, Michaels and Undertaker, both laying side by side. And I remember Ryan we were watching this live, going, sit up, kip up, here we go. And it was sweet. and they do, and it's great. It's an absolutely great spot. And it's funny, so many of the other Rumbles, I think 96 was the most extreme example of this, where the time from number 30 coming out to the end is just so brief. It's kind of ridiculous. Here, they finally did something where it's like, okay, number 30 comes out, and then the match goes on for a while after that. Mm-hmm. And it's almost a mini match between Michaels and Undertaker.
Right.
And it really works great. We should mention that this was in San Antonio. Michaels was hometown.
10 years after he won the title back in San Antonio with the Royal Rumble, yeah.
And Undertaker eventually wins.
By
funny,
the way,
there was no negativity from the crowd for eliminating a hometown guy, and they really played up that Undertaker, who has never lost at a WrestleMania, was going to now decide who he was going to face, and they were making it, you didn't want to get chosen by the Undertaker. So, again, I think this is one of the better Rumbles ever. I gave it 4 stars, and I think it's maybe a contender for the 3rd best Rumble ever.
I've got it a little closer to the middle of the pack. I gave it 3 stars. I liked the ending part as you did. The one time that the ending was almost sort of a mini match unto itself, and that's a thing where clearly it planted seeds in their head because it would be WrestleMania 2 years later and then 3 years later where you'd have the HBK Taker epic series going there. They also brought it back the next month in the whole thing of the Raw main event at WrestleMania versus the SmackDown main event. The February pay-per-view was Cena and HBK versus Batista and The Undertaker. They did that there.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things. This is
softening the brand split.
Yeah. So I say 3 stars. I have this in a tie with 2004 and 1993.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, well, you and I have already established we have different views on 1993.
What's funny is I have this very close to 04, much higher than you. I have both those 4 stars.
Okay, all right. So we both have it in there. Here's the thing, though, and this is something that I said to you off air as well, is that, and this, I don't hold this against the match, but as far as the time period being screwy, one of the things is, much like the previous years, the guys who were there at the end in the match ended up going on to be in a WrestleMania main event anyway.
You mean the non-winner, the runner-up, essentially.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that whoever was in there, and I think it was the last 3 guys in 06 all ended up in main event matches. Because when you watch it now, and again, we're watching it through early 2016 eyes, but you're looking at it, you're going Taker and Michaels, and they're playing it up on the screen about the high stakes. The winner goes on to WrestleMania. I'm going. Yeah. Dude, they're both going to be in world title matches.
You're
know
right.
What I mean?
It does hurt it a little bit.
It does.
Think the whole, you've got to win this match. It does. And there were other instances, I think, of this happening in future Rumbles. And like you said, it happened in the past. And again, it's kind of why I'm choosing to end Part 5 here.
Right.
It's because the brand split gets softer. You just kind of have them doing the same thing on both brands.
Yep.
Now, they ended the brand-only pay-per-views, I believe, in April. I believe Backlash 07 was
the first one that was full-on.
Was full-on. And
both of them. So, although, again, you could make the case that they were still calling it No Way Out, not Elimination Chamber at this point, right? I think it was still No Way Out.
The February pay-per-view was No Way Out.
Okay.
Correct.
So you could make a case, though, because it was Raw only in the main event. It was Cena and HBK making the appearance to wrestle in what was like an exhibition.
No. In 07? In
07, in February.
Backlash.
No, February. The No Way Out.
It was a tag match. It was a tag match with the main event. The 2 Raw guys versus the 2 SmackDown guys.
That's what I'm saying. So there was only Raw participation in the main event. And what was really kind of...
No, it wasn't.
Yeah,
it was Cena and Michaels, Raw, against Batista and Undertaker, SmackDown.
But that was the only participation on the whole card, is what I'm saying, for Raw. Of
Raw.
Raw.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry.
It depends on which way you look at it.
April
was full on.
Yeah, April was. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So by the time we get to Rumble 08, it's different. You've had a full almost year
Yes.
of the pay-per-views being back to integrated.
Well, and by the way, too, and we talked about this before, as far as, and this ties in very directly to the primacy of Raw, to the primacy of the WWE title, to the primacy of John Cena. Once they were all on the same card every month, it was always Cena that had to go out last. So much for, they mean just as much as the other title. No, sorry, they don't.
No, I agree. And then it was an issue that we talked about that,
exactly.
kind of they had driven home for really a year, going back a year and a half before this. So overall, though, I think with 2 4-star, I guess I liked both the Rumble and the Cena Umaga better than you did.
You did.
I have them both 4 stars or higher. I give this show an absolute thumbs up.
It was a surprisingly inoffensive show for me to watch. I don't like this time period at all.
Well,
I don't
you're
like
too
it at
iridependent. Again,
I'm very iridependent.
If you want to talk about Raws, and if you want to talk about Backlashes, and you want to talk about other stuff, sure, I'll give you 98 when it comes to that. But when it comes, just because the year 2007 may not have been as strong as the year 1998 doesn't mean that the 2007 Royal Rumble can't be better than the 1998 Royal Rumble, because it is.
It also goes to my enjoyment of it as we're watching it, which is the thing. When I made the joke about spreadsheets and stuff, I mean, spreadsheets and checking off boxes can't tell you how it makes you feel when you're watching it. And that's where...
I mean, I guess nothing really makes me warm and fuzzy, really.
Well,
to be honest with you, there isn't anything that makes me warm and fuzzy post 1987.
Okay.
I mean, there just isn't. There isn't anything that I'm like, oh God, I mean, there are things that like, okay, yeah, I remember the time period. Okay, I was having fun. I was being a knucklehead here, but I don't know. Like, to me,
I guess it just goes to my whole, philosophy of it here. The Les Thatcher, David Allen Coe thing. With the Hank Williams Jr. song. Can you make folks feel what you feel inside? That's how I look at things here. It's about what it makes folks feel.
I'll tell you what I felt inside when the '86 Hank Williams Jr. up the Monday Night Football theme, Glee.
Well, the last thing I had in my notes for this show was that, and another thing I'd sort of mention this to you off air a little bit, is that you talk about the things in this era. I think that's one of the things that today makes them caught so flat-footed. Like, OMG, why is everybody so upset about what we're doing in the Royal Rumble? They didn't care all those other years because there wasn't nearly as much at stake from 2003 to the 13 Royal Rumble, because it was just... hey, nothing's ruled out. Somebody could go wrestle for the other world title. It was always a thing where even after the Royal Rumble, nothing was set in stone. Today, it's pretty much set in stone, a direction going forward. And if people don't like it, they're going to let you hear about it. So that's what kind of makes this a little bit different. It just jumps out at me in that way.
You're right. It is interesting now that with the brands completely done.
It's high stakes, man.
Well,
you better get it right. You better get it right.
You're right, because you have to establish your one title match coming out of it. And generally, it's pretty predictable, and you're right, it better be good. Whereas here, it's like, okay, if the Rumble winner, if that's not that exciting, well, there's another title match that you can fall back on. There's something else. And they generally loaded up these WrestleManias. Again, I mean, no one match really draws the house anymore at WrestleMania.
Right.
There hasn't been, it's been 10 years since they built really around one match at a WrestleMania.
Oh yeah, I mean, what was the last one? Rock Austin 3? Because the next,
I wouldn't even say that was
the next closest would have been Taker and Triple H.
No, I would say no. I would say
how much further back do you have to go?
I would say Triple H Batista definitely had a positive impact on business, being the feature match at WrestleMania.
Well,
21.
JBL Cena also was getting pretty strongly pushed going into that.
I don't know. I don't know if that had anything. That was kind of a weak. I mean,
as far as one match carrying a show, do you maybe have to go back to HBK Austin? I think you might.
No. Well, Austin Rock did. I mean, everyone was. That's when Rock, honestly, everyone's like, whoa, this guy can do big business.
Right. But,
Rock Austin 2 at WrestleMania 17.
Right. That's true. Yeah, that did say, but I guess the point is you have to go way back in time to be able to find, where it was not spread out among a couple of different matches.
Mm-hmm.
So, very interesting.
No, I can tell you what the last bit. Rock Cena at 28. That was clearly that. What?
You had
the return of The Rock for those 3 WrestleManias.
Triple H, Taker, Hell in a Cell.
Rock Cena was head and shoulders above that. Not even close.
You're saying that drew the house disproportionately?
Yes.
Over an Undertaker streak match?
Yes, not even close.
That's where I disagree. Okay.
I think you're just wrong.
Okay.
No offense. I think you're just I mean, the 3 WrestleManias, while 2 of them weren't very good,
right,
that had Rock, 28 was the one that was actually good.
Okay.
With Rock back in the fold, The Rock was a clear difference maker business-wise.
Yeah, he really was. And these are the drought years here, where we're moving towards the end of the drought
this WrestleMania
years.
did, I mean, tremendous.
Well, drought of The Rock not being there is what I mean. The
when
Rock
we get
being
to
the
08,
difference maker.
2010, it's very interesting. I think those are the drought years.
Well, I
mean,
frankly. I just mean in terms of The Rock's presence not being there. We're flat in the middle of the years of where The Rock had nothing to do with the product. And, again, very interesting what they were able to do in this year. You liked the main event and you liked the WWE title match more than I did, but I grant you, again, this was, again, for as much as I hate this era, I'm not always hating these shows and hating the Rumble matches as much as I thought I would. So I will give you that. But my scores are still coming in below yours because, yes, era dependent. I plead guilty on that. So we start with a new era next time, folks, 2008 to 2010. Do we have a name for that era? Or are we going to have to come up with that before?
I may have to come up with it. Maybe Kyle didn't watch much from these years, except for Royal Rumble and WrestleMania.
Okay.
I've seen all the Rumbles. I've seen all of those Rumbles multiple times, but I don't really have. Well, 2 of them are actually really good. The Rumbles.
Okay.
But I don't have. It's just a weird era overall.
That's
and we'll
right.
get into the reasons why. Then.
It definitely is. We'll get into that and much, much more here with 6A next up in the Royal Rumble when we do 2008. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.